The collapse of Lehman Brothers on September 15th, 2008. It wasn't just the largest bankruptcy in U.S. history.
No, it was so much more than that.
It was the moment the Great Recession really became, cemented in everyone's minds.
Exactly. And if you only look at the headlines from that time, you see all the frantic last-minute stuff, the panicked calls, the deals falling through, all the spreadsheets just flashing red.
But focusing just on that, on the financial death, you miss the actual story.
Yeah.
The real drama here, the tragedy, is this 160-year saga of its life.
And it's a saga driven entirely by clashing personalities, these really deep friendships, and then just astonishing, fatal betrayals.
Right. And that's really the core of the source material we're diving into today, the Devil's Casino. Friendship, betrayal, and the high-stakes games played inside Lehman Brothers.
Our mission here isn't to just, track a timeline or analyze bond prices. It's way more intimate than that. We need to try and uncover the soul of Lehman, to understand how its very specific internal culture paved the road to its own destruction.
A culture that, on one hand, valued loyalty, but then
Until it didn't, and revered risk, until it killed them.
there's that ancient quote, character is destiny. And I feel like that's the only lens to really see this story through.
I completely agree. The mistakes that brought Lehman down weren't just external market forces. They were deeply, profoundly human.
Stemming from the flaws of its leaders. And for this deep dive, we're really going to focus on three key figures. Their destinies are just completely tied to the firms.
First, you have Dick Fuld, the CEO, taciturn, ultimately just blinded by arrogance.
Then T. Christopher Chris Pettit, the former Marine who basically wrote the firm's original moral code.
And finally, Joseph Joe Gregory, the ambitious, volatile number two, the wild card, who essentially replaced that code with just reckless greed.
We're basically charting the slow, agonizing death of a corporate soul.
And if you really want to understand the modern Lehman, you have to go back. You have to realize the decay started decades before 2008.
It was built on a kind of internal civil war, right?
A deeply entrenched culture clash. The tension between the blue blood investment bankers and the street fighting traders.
Okay, let's unpack that, because that really is the origin story. In the 1970s, Lehman had a very clear hierarchy.
Oh, absolutely. On one side, you had what the source calls the aristocracy.
The elite M&A bankers. Guys like Pete Peterson, the CEO, Steven Schwartzman, Robert Rubin.
Ivy League guys. Socially graceful, well-groomed. And they really looked down their noses at anyone who worked in trading.
They saw themselves as the sophisticated side of the business, the ones building the long-term client relationships.
Right. And on the other side, you had the trading arm, Lehman Commercial Paper Inc., or LCPI.
Run by Lou Glucksman.
An ex-naval officer, son of a lamp manufacturer, and according to the source, just perpetually furious.
And why was he so angry?
Because his trading unit was generating more than half the firm's total profits, but his people were openly, mocked by the banking elite.
They wouldn't even pay them the same compensation.
Not even close, which just cemented that division. It created this profound us versus them mentality.
And them was anyone in Lehman management who wasn't on the trading floor.
So Glucksman created a kind of shadow culture. It was built on toughness, competitive grit, and maybe most importantly, on deception.
The infamous 5x7-inch cards. This is such a critical detail.
It really is. It defines their whole future approach to risk. Traders would track their positions, often huge, volatile, way over the limits on these little index cards on a wall.
And if they got word that management was coming over from headquarters to check the books,
they'd literally snatch the cards off the wall and hide them. They were actively concealing the real volatility, the true extent of the risk they were taking.
So it was a profitable game. You learn that honesty is negotiable.
Exactly. The idea that you had to hide the facts from your own firm's management became standard operating procedure, not a bug, but a feature.
And a young Dick Fuld, who started in '69, he rises quickly under Glucksman, right? He's soaking all of this in.
He was a prodigy at this particular game. This is where he learned his toughness and his competitive grit.
So the fallout from that whole war, which ends with Glucksman ousting Peterson, but then driving away all the top bankers, it leaves Lehman really vulnerable.
Extremely. And that leads to the humiliating 1984 takeover by American Express Shearson.
The Slamex years, as they called them.
But ironically, that's what forged the bonds of the next generation of leadership, the so-called Ponderosa Boys.
I love this story. The nickname came from their 5 a.m. carpool.
Yeah, from Long Island to Wall Street, they were like a gym cult, and their trainer gave them nicknames from the TV show Bonanza.
So you have T. Christopher Chris Pettit, the leader. He's Pa, the moral compass.
Tommy Tucker was Adam, the good-looking, trusted confidant.
Stevie Lessing, the chubby one, was Haas.
And Joseph Joe Gregory, the nervous, volatile one, he was Little Joe. Fuld was a bit on the outside, a lieutenant to Pettit.
What's so crucial here is Pettit's ethos. He wasn't just a tough guy. He was the firm's moral center.
The keeper of the flame. I mean, decorated Vietnam vet, West Point graduate. His seriousness about honor made him seem almost messianic to his employees.
He saw integrity and loyalty as the foundation of their success, not just, a nice to have.
And that belief is just perfectly captured in that famous story from A Christmas Dinner in the late 80s.
Right. He stands up.
He looks around the room at his Ponderosa Boys and their families, and he says, every single person here is with their original spouse. That is why we are successful, because our word is our honor. We succeed in business because people can trust us.
Wow. That's not just a toast. That's a mission statement. The Ponderosa Code.
And he lived it, at least at first. There's that great anecdote about the trader whose kid was sick and needed to be moved to a hospital.
He needed a bridge loan.
And Pettit didn't just approve it. He personally made sure Lehman covered all the costs. He treated the employees like family. That bond was everything.
And that loyalty, that one firm idea, it becomes essential during the Slomex years.
Absolutely. Pettit and Peregrine Moncreiff were the ones who fought to keep the Lehman name from just disappearing under Shearson.
When Shearson tried to break up the trading group, Pettit led this unified group of, 450 people?
454. And he told Shearson, we're united. We come as a group or we don't come at all.
That's a huge gamble, a collective threat to quit.
But it worked. And he was hailed as the hero, the real leader who kept the spirit alive. He earned that loyalty.
Meanwhile, Fuld, the future CEO, is quietly going through this metamorphosis.
Yes. He started out known for just grunting and swearing. They called him the gorilla.
But he was also pragmatic, an intense, lifelong learner, as someone called him.
He knew he couldn't run a full-service investment bank acting like a gruff bond trader. He needed the polish of the very bankers he used to hate.
So he starts what the book calls his postgraduate study
into how to be an executive. And his main subject was the elite investment banker J. Tomlinson Tom Hill.
He studied him so intensely, someone joked he would have followed him into the men's room.
It was almost like a performance. Fuld would actively mimic Hill's mannerisms. The book mentions he would wait until Hill pulled out his nail clippers in a meeting.
And Fuld would do the exact same thing.
It was a deliberate acquisition of an executive persona, all in preparation for the day he would finally run his own firm.
And that day arrives in 1994. Lehman spins out of American Express. It should have been this huge celebration.
But in retrospect, it was a ticking time bomb. The transition in 94, it looked glorious, but the firm was fragile from day one.
I mean, they had the cascading balloons, Fuld proclaiming it's a new day, but the numbers were already terrible.
Earnings in the second quarter plummeted 79% from the year before. The market was just punishing them.
And despite all their trading experience, Fuld and Pettit, at first they showed this terrifying lack of understanding about being a public company.
Yeah, the former CFO, John Cecil, had to call an urgent meeting to explain the existential threat of a ratings downgrade for Moody's.
Okay, let's just pause here for a second. For our listeners, why is a ratings downgrade an immediate existential threat for a firm like Lehman?
It all comes down to commercial paper. That's the lifeblood of an investment bank.
Short-term, unsecured debt.
Right. They issue it every single day to fund their immediate operations. Paying traders, settling transactions, that kind of thing.
So if a ratings agency downgrades you,
the market suddenly sees you as too risky, investors stop buying your paper, and your short-term cash dries up, poof.
As the next CFO put it, we're toast.
They literally can't function. And Fuld and Pettit, who'd grown up in a subsidiary, they just didn't grasp its immediate terrifying link.
But the real erosion of the firm's code, it didn't start with the financial mistake.
Yeah.
It started with the profound personal failure from its moral leader, Chris Pettit.
The man who championed the original spouse code as the pillar of the firm's trust had an office affair
with Martha Dillman, known as the Stiletto.
Married, redheaded mother of 3, and suddenly the carpool broke up. The symbol of their unity was just gone. Pettit became distracted, hot-tempered. His colleagues, who had idolized him for his code of honor, saw this as the ultimate betrayal.
The moral anchor had become the living antithesis of his own code. That personal lapse just stripped him of his moral authority inside the firm.
And here's where it gets really interesting. How quickly that loss of authority turns into political maneuvering.
Oh, immediately. Joe Gregory, who was already seen as this ambitious loose cannon, he sees Pettit's failure as his big career opportunity.
Gregory's now the head of fixed income, the firm's revenue engine.
Yeah, and he resents Pettit for protecting what he saw as weaker divisions, like equities and banking.
So Gregory starts calling for Pettit's close allies to be fired.
Longtime friends. And Pettit, feeling that Ponderosa loyalty, he refuses.
And this forces Fuld to make the defining choice of his career. Does he back his old friend, the moral center, or the ambitious guy making all the money?
He chose money and ambition. In 1996, Fuld and Gregory executed this plan to force Chris into a box. Pettit's refusal to fire his friends gave Fuld the perfect excuse to strip him of his COO position.
Pettit was devastated. Betrayed by the very men he built the firm with. He resigned completely in 1997.
It's worth noting, though, he wasn't totally naive. He'd negotiated a clause that if Fuld ever fired him, he got a guaranteed $10 million payout.
He took the money and walked away, heartbroken. And he never spoke to any of them again. Fuld, Gregory, Tucker, Lessing, the whole inner circle.
And then just months later, the tragedy. He dies in a boating accident in Maine.
And the toxicity, the shattering of that one firm community, it was just horrifically laid bare at his funeral.
Because there were two competing funerals.
One, organized by his wife, Mary Ann, adhering to the traditional life he'd preached. The other, by Martha Dillman in Brooklyn.
Fuld and Gregory and the others felt they had to go to the one in Huntington. The tension must have been unbelievable.
Tommy Tucker, Pettit's closest friend, gave the eulogy. And the source says he was visibly tortured, knowing he'd been complicit in taking Chris out.
That image of the two funerals. It's like the firm's cherished value of integrity, just shattered right there, over a coffin.
It was completely visibly shattered, and with Pettit gone, his memory faded fast. Joe Gregory was now ascendant, the new guy banging the drums, urging the firm to take more and more risks.
The foundation of loyalty and integrity had been structurally replaced by just ruthless, unchecked ambition.
And that cultural shift gets reinforced and tragically justified by the next big crisis, the Russian debt default and the near collapse of long-term capital management in 1998.
This was a huge earthquake for Wall Street. Lehman stock just plummeted.
It was the firm's first real test of survival after Pettit, and Dick Fuld, finally, he rises to the occasion.
All that postgraduate study into being a public figure.
This was the moment it paid off. He successfully calms investors using his newfound public speaking skills and that guerrilla-like tenacity.
And he showed that classic Fuld belligerence when the Fed organized the LTCM bailout.
Right. They asked Wall Street firms for $250 million each, and Fuld, whose firm hadn't even invested in LTCM,
famously tells the CEO of Merrill Lynch, "I'd rather reach into my pants, take out my dick, and cut it off."
Crude, aggressive, fiercely defiant, classic Fuld.
He eventually put in $100 million, but the defiance worked for them. More importantly, they made a profitable bet on the crisis resolution.
They finished the year ahead. They basically profited from the chaos.
But hold on, couldn't you argue that Fuld's defiance there was actually smart business? They didn't bet on LTCM. Why should they bail out their competitors? How is that different from the final hubris?
That is the critical question. The 98 success didn't teach Fuld the value of caution. It taught him the value of bravado. The firm walked away from the bank, made a ton of money, and Fuld took exactly the wrong lesson from it.
It planted the seeds of arrogance.
Total arrogance. It confirmed his belief that Lehman could withstand any crisis because in the end, the government would step in or the market would rebound faster than anyone else expected.
So they didn't see LTCM as a warning. They saw it as a profitable trade that confirmed they had more guts than anyone else.
Right. So instead of installing better risk controls, Fuld just focuses on growth. He says they need to aim higher to get the stock price to $150 a share.
And that ambition becomes the fuel for the rise of Joe Gregory in the early 2000s.
Gregory gets rewarded for that shared hunger for risk. He becomes COO in 2002, then president, and there's this deeply revealing story.
When Peter Cohen, the former Shearson CEO, asks Fuld why he promoted Gregory.
And Fuld's reply is just shockingly cavalier. He says, "I don't know. He will probably be my undoing.
You saw the risk, said it out loud, but promoted him anyway.
And that undoing starts almost immediately, as Gregory's focus just drifts away from the actual business.
He becomes disconnected, obsessed with his lifestyle, his image.
Completely. Constantly swilling Listerine, offering Tic Tacs to people. He was focused on these huge, high-profile diversity initiatives, which meant he was ignoring the core, dangerous machinery of the bank.
And Fuld made it worse by skipping the Monday executive meetings, leaving Gregory in charge of agendas that were mostly about what he did over the weekend.
And how much he spent. The $15 million a year personal budget was legendary.
Buying a huge estate in the Hamptons that he used for 2 weeks a year.
It was a lifestyle of pure spectacle, and his nicknames reflected it. Uncle Joe, after Stalin. Darth Vader.
And that pettiness translated directly into institutional chaos. Let's talk about the glass door story.
Bob Millard was Lehman's biggest earner, but Gregory didn't like him, mostly because Millard could talk directly to Fuld.
So when Millard was moving offices, Gregory blocks him from getting a glass door, citing some fake building code violation.
The pettiness is just astonishing. Fuld had to step in and apologize, but it showed Gregory's emotional volatility.
And he promoted based on loyalty, not competence.
Creating this climate of fear. The biggest warning sign was the firing of Mike Gelband, the head of fixed income, in 2007.
A seismic event. Gelband was competent, and he could challenge Gregory.
And Gregory reportedly fired him without even telling the executive committee. One colleague said he feared for the firm's survival after that because no one dared speak truth to power anymore.
And this internal fear was so dangerous because Lehman was changing. It was morphing from a fixed income shop into a proprietary mortgage shop.
Betting its own balance sheet on real estate. And this is where Mark Walsh, King Midas, comes in.
Fuld gives him unparalleled access to the firm's balance sheet to invest directly in commercial real estate.
Basically turning the investment bank into a private equity fund on massive leverage. And at first he was hugely successful, made $80 million on one Times Square deal. Fuld loved it.
But by 2006, the smarter money Goldman, Deutsche Bank, they were already retreating from the mortgage market.
And Lehman, blinded by its '98 hubris, was still dancing.
The warnings were explicit and internal. Mike Gelband and Alex Kirk, they issued this dire warning to 150 senior managers.
Yeah, they showed clear data that the real estate business could lose billions.
And Fuld just shrugged it off. He had this dangerous idea that taking on more risk always brought in more business later on. The '98 lesson was now a fatal hubris.
By 2007, Lehman's real estate commitment shot up from $20 billion to $40 billion in 1 month. They were doubling down just as everyone else was getting out.
And we have to talk about how this pressure extended into the home.
Yeah.
This whole culture of the wives.
The expectation was total, almost military devotion to the firm. Krinjak, wife of co-COO, she described it perfectly.
As a Lehman wife, you raise your kids by yourself. You have your babies by yourself in the hospital.
She tells a story of being in labor, and her husband drives away to Hong Kong for a meeting, because making a personal choice that hurt Lehman meant it was over for you.
The one firm ethos of Pettit was completely twisted. His version was about taking care of your family. This version was sacrificing your family for the firm.
Any personal crisis was a liability. Scott Shafir, head of equities, asked for time off when his kid was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. He comes back, he's demoted.
And then Gregory has the cruelty to ask him to move to Asia. Shafir quit. Another sign the soul of the firm was just gone.
Kathy Fuld felt it too. She said she seldom saw her own family because they didn't like Dick. The wives had to maintain this smiling, wealthy presence at all these mandatory events.
So by late 2007, with all the warnings ignored, the culture poisoned. The time bomb is ticking. And it starts with a disastrous choice for a new CFO.
The Callan disaster. December 2007, Joe Gregory installs Erin Callan as CFO.
And colleagues were in open rebellion because she had zero accounting background. She was a banker.
It was a textbook case of promoting a loyalist over competence right before the worst financial crisis in modern history.
Callan was immediately thrust into the spotlight as Gregory's pet and the firm's media darling. She was charismatic, confident.
A new kind of CFO. Conspicuous and female, and she did for a moment calm the market after the Q1 2008 earnings. She was a temporary hero.
But it was all built on shaky ground. The hedge fund manager, David Einhorn, identified this huge $1.1 billion discrepancy in her reporting of Level 3 assets.
And we should just clarify what Level 3 assets are. They're the most illiquid, hardest to value things on a bank's balance sheet. Their values are based on internal models, not market prices.
So Einhorn correctly guessed they were just making up the numbers. wildly overvaluing these toxic assets to hide the true losses.
Right. And Callan's hubris became the public face of this denial. In May 2008, a Wall Street Journal profile comes out, and it mentions her extensive use of a personal shopper at Bergdorf Goodman.
Appalled colleagues saw this focus on high-end fashion at a moment of crisis as just wildly inappropriate, terminal denial.
The reckoning came fast. After a catastrophic $2.8 billion Q2 loss in June, the first quarterly loss since the spinoff Fuld knew he had to act,
The investment banker Skip McGee urged him to admit mistakes, hold senior management accountable, a clear shot at Gregory.
and he was ignored by the rest of the executive committee. They were still terrified of Uncle Joe.
But Fuld had to sacrifice someone, so Gregory and Callan were ousted together on June 12th.
And Gregory, ever the calculator, knew the media would focus entirely on the dramatic fall of Erin Callan, the glamorous, most powerful woman on Wall Street. It completely eclipsed his own demise.
A tactical exit. Bart McDade is immediately made president and starts damage control. He brings back John Cecil, the old CFO.
Who looks at the books and is just appalled. He finds roughly $40 billion in commercial real estate risk alone, much of it impossible to sell.
Fuld's final, desperate attempt at survival was to get a capital infusion from the Korea Development Bank, KDB.
And this negotiation fails utterly, and you can trace it directly back to Fuld's ingrained hubris. He refused to face reality.
So the key detail here is that Fuld refused to sell the McLean Co.
Exactly. KDB wanted to buy a stake in the valuable, functioning parts of the business, the brokerage, asset management, and leave the toxic stuff behind for Lehman to deal with.
But Fuld insisted they buy the whole company, toxic assets and all.
The Korean negotiators were just put off. Fuld kept making the same arrogant pitch over and over, telling them they were missing an opportunity to take on his bad assets.
Eventually, his own team had to physically exclude him from the talks to try and save the deal.
But the damage was done. The Koreans walked out.
That final weekend, September 13th and 14th, was just pure chaos. J.P. Morgan freezes $17 billion of Lehman's cash.
And Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson, Fuld's old counterpart from the LTCM crisis, he refuses to provide a government bailout.
His decision was informed by character, wasn't it? He was concerned about the moral hazard of bailing out a firm whose CEO was seen as so arrogant.
Paulson believed Fuld thought he was too big to fail, that the government had no choice but to save him. So Paulson made a stand against that specific brand of institutional arrogance.
And with no government support and no buyer, Lehman filed for Chapter 11 on September 15th, the largest filing in history.
The remnants were snapped up fast. Barclays got the North American business. And crucially, Christian Meisner, the head of European operations, quickly brokered a deal with Nomura for the European and Asian parts.
That move saved more than 10,000 jobs, a selfless one-firm move in stark contrast to everything else that had been happening.
Something Chris Pettit would have been proud of, for sure.
But the final bitter chapter of betrayal belongs, of course, to Joe Gregory.
Despite everything, despite the failure he engineered, he filed a staggering $233 million civil suit against the Lehman estate for compensation.
In Fuld's eyes, this was the final proof of Gregory's great weakness, the insecurity, and the greed.
And here's the ultimate irony. Dick Fuld, despite losing almost everything, made no claim against the estate himself. When it no longer mattered, he finally saw Gregory for what he was.
A phony who valued money over loyalty.
Fuld was furious. He finally embraced integrity, but only after it was too late.
So when you connect it all back, what's the big picture? I mean, Lehman survived the Glucksman-Peterson War, the '94 crisis, the LTCM meltdown. It was resilient to external shocks.
But it could not survive the cultural shift. The death of the firm was the death of its internal ethos. It went from Pettit's moral code to Gregory's self-centered risk-taking.
All of it exacerbated by Fuld's misplaced loyalty and his blinding ambition. The culture ate the strategy for lunch.
Hank Paulson said it best. It is not healthy for a CEO to stay too long. Fuld was in power for nearly 15 years, and his team, terrified by the Darth Vader dynamic, just stopped challenging him.
The organization's immune system failed completely.
And the cost extended to everyone. Kathy Fuld, once a fixture of New York society, was completely ostracized. She had to sell her art, step down from the MoMA board. Everyone paid a steep, permanent price.
It really is a story of a lost soul, the one embodied by Chris Pettit, the Marine who preached integrity. His spirit was literally erased from the firm's history books.
Gregory had abandoned a project to document the firm's history because it made Pettit look too good and Fuld look bad. The integrity was censored.
Which brings us to a final provocative thought for you. Years after Pettit's death and the firm's collapse, Tom Tucker visited a medium who claimed to summon Pettit's spirit.
Pettit's ghost was reportedly rediscovered through a psychic, which is such an apt, almost mythical metaphor for the firm's lost moral compass. So if the ultimate value of a financial institution really resides in the trustworthiness and honor of its people, what price does a company pay when it trades ethical leadership for unchecked ambition? And can a soul, once it's completely lost to greed, ever truly be recovered?